They couldn't see him. That was the problem that changed everything. During the winter of 1939, in the frozen forests of eastern Finland, something impossible began to happen. Soviet soldiers, well-trained, well-equipped men from one of the largest armies in the world, started disappearing. Not in battles, not in explosions, not in chaotic firefights where confusion could explain losses. One by one, silently, without warning, without explanation. At first, commanders dismissed the reports. Accidents, they said. The cold, disorientation, the terrain. Finland's forests were brutal. Temperatures dropped to 40 degrees below zero. Men froze to death. Equipment failed. Confusion was inevitable. But the losses didn't stop. They accelerated. Day after day. Week after week. Always the same pattern. One shot. One body. No sound before impact. No muzzle flash. No trace of the shooter. Patrols were sent to investigate. They found nothing. Search teams combed the woods for hours. They returned empty-handed, confused, afraid. By the time Soviet High Command realized what was happening, the count was already staggering. Over 500 men. Dead. Killed by a single soldier they never saw. Not a platoon. Not a company. One man. Using a rifle with no scope. Just iron sights. In conditions so extreme that modern equipment failed. This is the story of the most terrifying sniper in military history, told from the perspective of the men who hunted him, the men who tried everything to stop him, and failed. December 1939, eastern Finland, near the Soviet-Finnish border. For the Soviet soldiers advancing through the frozen wilderness, the invasion was supposed to be routine. Finland was small, less than 4 million people, poorly equipped, outnumbered 50 to 1 in some sectors. The Red Army had tanks, aircraft, artillery measured in thousands of guns. Moscow's assumption was simple. Resistance would collapse within days. Weeks at most. It didn't. The forests changed everything. These weren't the open battlefields where Soviet doctrine excelled. These were dense, endless woodlands where visibility collapsed after 30 meters. Where snow fell so heavily it erased tracks within minutes. Where temperatures didn't just freeze water. They froze metal, fuel, exposed flesh. Soldiers walked through terrain that felt alien. Trees packed so tightly that formations broke apart. Roads that existed on maps, but disappeared under snow in reality. Landmarks that became indistinguishable from each other. Navigation became guesswork. Movement became exhausting. And then the deaths began. Private Dmitry Volkov wrote home during the first week. We advanced 20 kilometers today. 3 men did not return. No one heard shots. No one saw the enemy. The officers say it is the cold. But the cold does not shoot. At first, no one connected the losses. A soldier collapsed while walking point, assumed exhaustion. Another fell while adjusting his pack, assumed frostbite. A third was found dead near a supply route, assumed stray fire from another unit. But the pattern repeated. Men hit cleanly. Single shots. Always fatal. Always without warning. The wounded, those few who survived long enough to be evacuated, described the same experience. No sound before impact. No sense of danger. One moment walking, the next on the ground, bleeding into snow that turned red before freezing solid. Officers began comparing casualty reports. The numbers didn't match expected losses from environmental conditions. These weren't men freezing to death. These were men being killed with precision. Patrols were dispatched to locate enemy positions. They moved cautiously, scanning tree lines, checking elevated ground, probing areas with good sight lines. They found nothing. No disturbed snow indicating a firing position. No spent cartridges. No tracks leading anywhere useful. The forest returned to silence before they could read it. What terrified the men wasn't the deaths themselves. Soldiers understood risk. It was the absence of explanation. In conventional combat, you saw the enemy. You heard gunfire. You knew where threats came from. Here, death arrived without announcement. Soldiers began moving differently. They clustered together for psychological comfort, even though tactically it made them better targets. They stopped trusting open ground. They scanned tree lines constantly, seeing threats in every shadow. Fear spread faster than orders, faster than supplies, faster than reinforcements. One sergeant, in a report that would later be studied by military historians, wrote, "The men are afraid, not of battle. They have proven themselves brave. They are afraid of the forest. They believe something is in there, something that sees them but cannot be seen. Morale is collapsing faster than I can rebuild it." By the end of the first week, casualty counts from the sector began alarming higher command. Not because the numbers were catastrophic compared to full-scale battles, they weren't, but because no one could explain them. Men were dying without engagement, without contact, without the enemy ever being identified. Counter-sniper units were assembled, experienced marksmen, some veterans of previous conflicts. Their orders were clear: find the shooter, fix his position, eliminate him. They deployed with confidence. Soviet doctrine for dealing with snipers was well established. Flood the area with troops. Use suppressive fire. Force movement. Locate and destroy. It didn't work. The deaths continued. And slowly, a realization spread among the men on the ground. A realization their officers refused to accept. They weren't being attacked by a unit. They weren't facing a coordinated enemy force. They were being hunted by one man, somewhere in that frozen forest. Invisible, patient, methodical. And he was winning. The first confirmed sighting came during the second week of operations. A Soviet patrol, moving cautiously through snow-covered terrain, reported observing movement approximately 200 meters distant. White on white, almost impossible to distinguish. A shape that didn't match the trees. A silhouette that disappeared the moment they focused on it. The patrol commander ordered immediate fire. Rifles opened up. Machine gun bursts followed. Rounds struck trees and kicked up snow. When they advanced to investigate, they found nothing. No body. No blood. No equipment left behind. But they found something else. A single spent cartridge, partially buried in fresh snow. Already cold to the touch. The position overlooked a route that had been used repeatedly over the past 3 days. The angle was perfect, clear sight lines, natural concealment, multiple escape routes. Whoever had been there had chosen the location with precision, and they had left deliberately after the patrol revealed itself. This changed the tactical assessment. The enemy wasn't reacting to Soviet movements. He was anticipating them. He knew where they would go before they did. Field officers began compiling data across multiple units. Reports were cross-referenced. Patterns emerged with disturbing clarity. Losses occurred along predictable routes, paths that terrain naturally funneled movement into. Kills happened during specific times, not randomly, but during transitions when attention dropped, when formations relaxed, when soldiers paused to rest. Officers were targeted more frequently than enlisted men. Radio operators, messengers, anyone whose death would disrupt command and control. This wasn't random shooting. This was selection, calculation, strategy. Counter-sniper teams adjusted their approach. They began using decoys, soldiers instructed to walk exposed routes while observers watched from concealment. They fired randomly into forests, hoping to provoke a response that would reveal position. They rotated routes. They staggered timing. They changed patrol sizes. They moved at night. None of it worked. The sniper refused to be baited. He refused to be rushed. He fired only when conditions overwhelmingly favored him, and then vanished before response teams could close distance. Days passed. The kill count climbed. Frustration turned to desperation. Lieutenant Anatoly Gurev, in a report dated December 28, 1939, wrote, "We have deployed our best marksmen. We have saturated suspected areas with fire. We have altered every tactical variable available to us. Nothing changes. The enemy continues to operate with complete impunity. My men no longer trust the forest. They no longer trust each other. They no longer trust me. Morale is not declining. It has collapsed. Entire sectors slowed. Movement became hesitant. Units requested reassignment, requests that were denied. Orders to advance were met with reluctance that bordered on insubordination, because by then, the men understood something their commanders refused to accept. They couldn't win. Not with tactics. Not with numbers. Not with equipment. The forest itself had become weaponized, and their enemy understood it in ways they never could. One private, in a letter intercepted by Finnish intelligence, wrote to his family, "We are not fighting a soldier. We are fighting a ghost, and ghosts cannot be killed. I do not believe I will survive this forest. If you receive this letter, know that I tried. But some enemies cannot be fought." But the man hunting them wasn't a ghost. He was a 33-year-old Finnish farmer named Simo Häyhä, barely 5 feet tall, quiet, unremarkable in appearance. A man who, before the war, spent his days working the land and hunting in the forests near his home. A man who had decided that every Soviet soldier who entered his forest was already dead. They just didn't know it yet. By January 1940, Soviet command had committed significant resources to eliminating one man. Artillery was used to saturate suspected firing positions. Shells rained down on areas where kills had occurred. Trees splintered. Snow exploded. The forest was torn apart by high explosives. Aircraft were deployed for reconnaissance, pilots scanning frozen terrain for signs of movement, for disturbed snow, for anything that suggested human presence. Entire companies were tasked with sweeping forest sectors, hundreds of men moving in coordinated patterns, clearing ground meter by meter. The losses slowed, but they did not stop. Simo Häyhä had adapted. He fired less frequently now. Days passed without engagement. He allowed patrols to move through areas where he had previously operated. He observed how search teams functioned, where they looked, how long they stayed alert when discipline relaxed. And then he fired. According to Soviet after-action reports, the psychological impact exceeded the physical casualties. Men stopped trusting their surroundings. Every halt felt like a mistake. Every movement felt exposed. Every tree could hide death. Officers struggled to maintain discipline. Orders to advance were questioned. Patrols moved slower than doctrine allowed. Units compressed into tighter formations for psychological comfort, which only made them easier targets. Counter-sniper teams reported the same frustration repeatedly. They could predict when he might fire based on movement patterns, but never where from. They could estimate distance based on sound, but never locate the actual position. They could respond to shots within seconds, but never fast enough to matter. The man they were hunting understood something fundamental about asymmetric warfare. He didn't need to kill everyone. He just needed to kill enough to make movement psychologically unbearable. And he was succeeding. On January 22, 1940, conditions aligned in a way that would become infamous in Soviet military records. Movement through a critical forest corridor increased sharply. Multiple units were ordered to pass through the same compressed route. Supply columns, infantry reinforcements, command elements. The pressure to maintain momentum overrode caution. Häyhä was already in position. He had arrived before dawn, moving through darkness when Soviet forces were least active. He selected terrain that offered natural concealment, multiple sidelines, and, critically, several escape routes. He did not move for 8 hours. As light grew and movement began, he observed, counting, timing, memorizing patterns. Then he fired. One shot. Clean. A Soviet officer fell while issuing orders to his unit. Confusion rippled through the formation. Men scattered. Some sought cover. Others froze, uncertain where the threat originated. Häyhä waited, observing the response, noting how they moved, where they looked. An hour later, another unit entered the same corridor. He fired again. Throughout the day, the pattern repeated. Not rapidly, that would risk detection, but methodically. One shot, then stillness, Then another when opportunity presented itself. By nightfall, dozens had fallen in the same sector. Soviet records from that day note something unprecedented. An entire sector effectively ceased operations. Not because of overwhelming enemy force, not because of strategic retreat ordered from above, but because soldiers refused to move. Officers issued orders. Men did not follow them. Some units simply stopped advancing. Others withdrew without authorization. The forest had become psychologically impassable. This was the moment Soviet commanders finally understood what they were facing. Not a sniper using extraordinary equipment. Not a team operating in coordination. Not a special forces unit. One man, using a standard-issue Mosin-Nagant rifle. With iron sights, no scope, no magnification, no modern optics. Just patience, white camouflage, and an understanding of terrain that no amount of training could replicate. The realization was devastating, because if one soldier could achieve this level of battlefield disruption, then the entire strategic assumption underlying the invasion, that overwhelming numerical and material superiority guaranteed victory, was fundamentally flawed, and there was nothing they could do about it. Captain Mikhail Ilyashin, in a report dated January 25th, wrote, "We have attempted everything. Counter-sniper operations, artillery saturation, air reconnaissance, coordinated sweeps, bait tactics. Nothing succeeds. The enemy operates with complete freedom. He chooses when to engage. He chooses when to withdraw. We are reactive. He is proactive. This is not a tactical problem. This is a psychological one, and I do not know how to solve it." The hunt continued, but everyone understood the truth. They weren't hunting Simo Häyhä. He was hunting them. March 6, 1940. By this point in the war, the situation had shifted. Negotiations were underway in Moscow. The Winter War was approaching its end. Finland would be forced to cede territory. The Soviet Union would claim victory, on paper. But in the forests of eastern Finland, the duel continued. Simo Häyhä remained active. His confirmed kill count had climbed to numbers that seemed impossible to verify. Soviet units rotated through the sector more frequently now, replacing exhausted men with fresh troops. It didn't help. The stories had already spread. The fear was institutional. Men entered the forest knowing what waited for them. Officers struggled to maintain any semblance of morale. On March 6, 1940, Soviet forces deployed a coordinated response unlike anything attempted before. Artillery was pre-registered on likely firing positions. Suppressive fire plans were established. Blocking elements were positioned to cut off escape routes. Aircraft were on standby for immediate reconnaissance. The goal was simple: trap him. Force him into a mistake. Close the net. Movement increased through a sector where Häyhä had operated before. The Soviets were deliberately creating opportunity. But this time, they were ready. Häyhä observed the pattern. He recognized the trap. But the target was too valuable to ignore. A Soviet officer, clearly identifiable, moving with deliberate exposure. He made a decision that nearly cost him his life. He fired. The response was instantaneous and overwhelming. Artillery shells began falling within seconds. Machine gun fire raked the tree line. Rifle shots converged from multiple directions, not random suppression, but coordinated fire designed to box him in. For the first time in the entire war, Simo Häyhä was caught in a collapsing perimeter. He moved immediately, abandoning the firing position without hesitation. But escape routes were blocked. Fire intensified. Bullets struck trees and snow around him, not missing by much, but closing in with terrifying precision. Then impact. An explosive round, likely a fragmentation shell or specialized ammunition, detonated near his position. The blast waved through him sideways. Snow erupted. His rifle was torn from his grip. He was hit. The damage was catastrophic. The projectile had struck his face, shattering bone, destroying tissue. His left jaw was gone. Teeth were embedded in what remained of his cheek. Blood poured into the snow. Bright red against pure white, impossible to hide. Consciousness flickered. Pain overwhelmed all thought. Movement became impossible. This was how the duel ended. Not with a final shot exchanged. Not with capture. Not with tactical retreat. But with a wound that should have been fatal. Finnish forces recovered him hours later, extracting him from snow that had already begun freezing around his body. He was unconscious. Breathing was shallow and irregular. Field medics took one look at the injury and assumed he would not survive transport. He was evacuated under cover of darkness, moved through supply routes that were themselves under threat. The journey took hours. Every jolt threatened to finish what the enemy had started. He remained in a coma for 6 days. On March 13, 1940, the Winter War officially ended. Finland and the Soviet Union signed an armistice. The fighting stopped. Territory was ceded. Casualties were counted. Simo Häyhä was still unconscious. He woke on March 19th. The doctors could not explain it. The wound was too severe. The blood loss too extreme. The trauma too catastrophic. He should not have survived the initial impact. He should not have survived transport. He should not have survived surgery. And yet he did. Recovery was slow and agonizing. Speech was difficult. His jaw had been reconstructed, but functionality was limited. The left side of his face remained permanently disfigured. He would never look the same. But he was alive. When he was finally able to communicate, military officials compiled the final count. According to official Finnish military records, verified through unit confirmations, officer reports, and post-engagement documentation, Simo Häyhä achieved between 505 and 542 confirmed kills during the Winter War. In approximately 100 days of active operations, this number represents only rifle kills that could be verified through military procedure. It does not include unconfirmed kills. It does not include kills made with other weapons. It represents only what could be documented with certainty. It is the highest confirmed sniper tally in military history, a record that has never been broken. The Soviet soldiers who survived the Winter War never forgot. They didn't know his name during the fighting. He was simply the enemy who could not be seen. But after the war, when records were compiled and stories compared, a name emerged. Belaya Smert, the White Death. Simo Häyhä did not become famous immediately. Finland was rebuilding. The war had left scars, physical, territorial, economic, psychological. Soldiers returned to civilian life quietly. There were no victory parades, no elaborate medal ceremonies. Survival itself was the priority. Häyhä returned to farming, to the life he had known before the war. The simplicity of land, seasons, routine. He did not speak often about what happened in the forests. When asked, his answers were brief, factual, emotionless. The man who had controlled life and death with surgical precision showed no interest in dramatizing it. For decades, he lived quietly in rural Finland. He worked the land. He hunted, though never with the same purpose. He avoided attention. Recognition came later, much later. As military historians began compiling comprehensive records from the Winter War, his name appeared repeatedly. The numbers were verified independently. The accounts were cross-referenced. What seemed impossible became documented fact. A single man, using a rifle with iron sights, in temperatures that froze modern equipment and killed through exposure alone, had achieved a level of tactical effectiveness that no military doctrine could adequately explain. He became a subject of study. Documentaries were produced. Books were written. Military academies analyzed his methods. Interviews were requested. When asked late in life if he regretted anything he had done, Häyhä's response was characteristically simple. I did what I was told to do, as well as I could. When asked what he felt about the men he killed, his answer was even simpler. I was defending my country. No hesitation, no elaboration, no attempt to justify or glorify. He lived to the age of 96, dying peacefully in 2002, one of the longest-lived combat veterans in Finnish history, despite wounds that should have killed him in 1940. His legacy is not one of glorification. It is one of precision, of patience, of understanding that in war, invisibility is not a limitation. It is the ultimate advantage. Modern militaries still study his methods. The tactical use of iron sights over scopes in extreme cold. The psychological impact of patient, selective fire. The strategic dominance of terrain mastery. The power of individual initiative in asymmetric warfare. But the lesson that endures is simpler than any tactical manual. One soldier, in the right conditions, with absolute discipline, can reshape a battlefield. Not through overwhelming firepower, not through superior technology, not through numerical advantage, but through control. Simo Häyhä proved that the most dangerous weapon in war is not the rifle. It is the person who knows exactly when to fire and when to wait. And that lesson remains unteachable, because it requires something no training can provide, no doctrine can instill, no technology can replicate. The willingness to become invisible, the patience to remain so, and the discipline to move only when movement serves victory. The Soviet soldiers who entered that frozen forest in 1939 learned this lesson the hardest way possible. They learned that the enemy you cannot see is infinitely more dangerous than the one you can. That fear of the unknown is more destructive than any artillery barrage. That one man in the right place, at the right time, with the right mindset, can defeat an army, not by destroying it, but by making it destroy itself.